Hi, this is Marilyn Woodruff with At Knits and Designs, and I'm here to talk to you today about the stitches in the Reflecting Pool Shawlette. There's a couple of different stitch options that you can choose in this shawl. One of them is a traditional assigned pooling stitch, and one of them is a variation on that same stitch. But first, I want to talk about the yarn. So in order for this pattern to be successful, you need to choose a main color that allows you to do assigned pooling. Not all variegated colorways will work with assigned pooling. You can identify colors by looking at the way that the skein looks when it's skeined up. So this is a skein of a Chick That Knits Antique Rose that I'm going to be demonstrating the rosebud stitch on. But you can see a majority of the skein is a single color. And then there's just a little bit of the skein that is the color that aligns to the assigned pooling. Depending upon the different dyers, the length of that assigned pooling section may adjust. So a Chick That Knits does about a quarter of her skein in an assigned pooling colorway. This is an example of a Mad Tosh colorway that also works for assigned pooling. Again, you can see that a vast majority of this skein is going to be the silver, but there is about a quarter or so of the skein that is going to be the assigned pooling colorway. So this is what they look like in the skein. When you actually take the skein apart, you can see that the assigned pooling pools even when you're just looking at the skein on its own. The vast majority of the skein is this cream color that you have right here. So that's about 3/4. And then the remainder of the skein has the secondary color with it. So the way that the colors flow in the secondary color will determine what kinds of stitches look best with that particular yarn. So we're going to start with a basic floret stitch, which looks good no matter what kind of assigned pooling yarn you have. This is one that's just a basic cluster stitch, and it's kind of if you're not sure what your yarn's going to do, this is always a winning stitch. And this stitch ends up looking like these little floral clusters. So each one of these clusters takes up the assigned pooling part of the yarn. So the way the pattern is written is literally you will just knit. Sometimes it's in garter, this particular pattern's in stockinette. And you'll just knit until you get to the assigned pooling color. So if I pull this particular color out of its skein, you can see that for the most part, it's this light blue. And then I'm going to knit all the way through this light blue, and then I see that my color starts to shift. So when my color starts to shift, this is my indication that it's time to start the assigned pooling stitches. And you'll see that it goes through this cream into coral, and then it has another dark line. That's my clue that it is time to stop my assigned pooling stitches. So this particular yarn, this much of the yarn will be consumed with the assigned pooling stitches. Swatches are always helpful in assigned pooling because depending upon what needles you're using and depending upon what your gauge is, will determine how many loops it takes to use up that color. So we will just start the row and follow the pattern as established until we get to the assigned pooling color. So I will just knit across, and if the assigned pooling color comes up when I'm on the knit side of the stockinette, then I will follow the instructions for the right side. And if it comes up when I'm on the wrong side of the stockinette, then I will follow the instructions for the wrong side. Depending upon which stitch you choose, those instructions may be the same, but most likely they are not the same. You'll see that one of them is a reverse of the other so that they both look good on the right side of the fabric. So I'm coming up on my colorway, and I will meet you when I get there. Okay, I've knitted up to where I am starting to see my assigned pooling color come into place. So I'm on the right side of my work, so from the right side, I'm going to knit into a stitch, and I'm going to wrap the yarn twice around the needle. I'm going to do that 5 times. So that's 1 stitch, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And I'm about not quite halfway through my colors. So if you see that 5 times doesn't work for your gauge and you need to do more or less, I would encourage you to do so. The one caveat is, for this particular stitch, make sure you have an odd number of stitches. Otherwise, you'll have to knit 2 together or things like that to make your stitch count come out even, because the cluster stitch does require that you do an odd number of stitches. So you can do 3, 5, 7. If you see that you need 4 or 6, I would recommend changing your needle size to try to get to where you can use 3 or 5. So once we have our 5, you saw that I double looped them. Then I'm going to pull them back over to my other needle and take off that double loop. So now I just have elongated stitches. Now I'm going to knit all 5 of these together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to knit, purl, knit, purl, knit that will make 5 stitches to replace these 5 stitches. So there's no change in your stitch count. So because I'm on the knit side of the work, I'm going to knit 5 together. Okay, now instead of taking this stitch off of my left-hand needle, I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to bring my yarn forward, and now I'm going to purl into those 5 stitches. That's 2 stitches. Now I'm going to take my yarn to the back, and I'm going to knit 5. That makes my 3rd stitch. I'm going to bring my yarn forward, and I'm going to purl 5. That's my 4th stitch. And then I'm going to take my yarn to the back, and I'm going to knit 5. That's my 5 stitches. Now, one trick here is if you take your left-hand needle and you slide it into these 5 and then kind of push down just a little bit, you can make yourself a little bit of wiggle room there. And it also makes that cluster stitch nice and tight. You're going to slip all of those back. And you can see by pushing that down, now all these loops are the same size, so you get some nice even stitches. Now I'm just going to knit 5 normally. Knit 1, knit 2, knit 3, 4, and 5. And you can see I'm at the end of my assigned pooling yarn, so I'm back to the color that I had started with. And I have a nice little cluster on my underneath my needle with 5 stitches on to replace those original 5 stitches. This space right here, there'll be another one on this other side as I knit on. When you come back and purl the other side, that space will close up. And so each of these clusters will end up looking something like this as you work through the shawl. So once you finish that cluster, you just continue to knit normally until the next time you see that indicator that it's time to do your assigned pooling stitch. Okay, here I am on the purl side of my work, and I have come up to my assigned pooling color. So now we're going to work the floret stitch on the wrong side of the fabric. So to do it, it will look exactly opposite of what we did before. So we're going to purl 5 stitches, double wrapping each stitch. So we're going to double wrap, purl 1, double wrap, purl 2, double wrap, purl 3, double wrap, purl 4, double wrap, purl 5. So now I've got 5 stitches that have 2 loops each. I'm going to slip those stitches back to my left needle, dropping that second loop. 3, 4, 5. Okay, you can see now I've got 5 elongated stitches on my left-hand needle. I'm going to do the exact opposite of what I did on the knit row. I'm going to purl 5 together, then knit, purl, knit to create 5 new stitches to replace these stitches. So I'm going to slip my needle into purl. I'm going to purl 5 together. There's 1, yarn to the back. Going to knit 5 together. That's 2, yarn forward. 3, yarn to back, and you see I'm taking it between the needles. 4, and then yarn forward to purl 5. And on the purl side especially, I do this kind of far back on the needle just so that those stitches don't accidentally slip off while I'm trying to purl them. So now I've created my 5. I'm going to do just like I did on the knit side. I'm going to kind of slide my needle in and then tamp those stitches down just a little bit to elongate them. Get them good in there and slide them back to the left needle. And now I'm going to purl each of these 5 stitches individually. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that completes my cluster on the wrong side. And you can see it looks exactly like the others on the right side. So you've worked it in mirror opposite. And you'll continue along your way until you get to the next assigned pooling color. One thing to note, if you happen to come up to your assigned pooling color and you are at the end of a row, never fear. There's a couple things that you can do. So as long as you're near an end of a row, it doesn't make a whole lot of difference. The one thing to always be cognizant of is you never want to do an assigned pooling cluster on the last 2 or 3 stitches because that's where you're going to be doing increases, and you never want that cluster to be kind of hanging off the side. So you can see over here I've had a couple that come right up to the edge, and if that happens, you can either just ignore it, or you can do what I've done here, which is a partial cluster. So you can come to the edge and you see that color is starting to go, and so you have to get to the end and then turn it or whatever. And then instead of doing a cluster of 5, I just do a cluster of 3. So then I do a cluster of 3 and I knit, purl, knit to make my 3, and that uses up the rest of my yarn, and I go on. But if you're not comfortable doing that, there's no problem. If you get to the end of the row and you're halfway through your assigned pooling color and don't think you have enough to do a cluster stitch, just ignore it and knit normally. As long as it's on your border, no one will ever know the difference. It'll just look like a really pretty color coming into the border of the shawl. Okay. For the rosebud stitch, you can do this with any yarn that is assigned pooling, but it looks particularly good if you've got a section of green followed by a section that looks like flowers, ending with a section of green, because that way the rosebuds really do look like leaves. You can see kind of what this rosebud stitch looks like here. It's just a series of 3 clusters, but like I said, you can do this with any colors. All right, I've arrived at my assigned pooling color, and I'm going to start with a leaf, and you may need to fiddle a little bit with the counts depending upon how long that color is on your particular skein of yarn. But for mine, I'm going to just do a single stitch. And you notice I just knit normally. I'm not actually double looping this stitch. I'm going to move that stitch back to my left hand needle. I'm going to knit and purl into this stitch. So first I'm going to knit into this stitch. And then without dropping it, I'm going to bring my yarn forward and I'm going to purl into this stitch. Oops. Now I'm going to move both of these 2 back to the left hand needle. And in a normal stitch where we would be doing floret, we would just knit these. But because we started with 1 stitch, I'm going to knit these 2 together. And that will cause me to end with 1 stitch. And you can see I've used up all my green, and now I'm ready to start on my rosebud color. Okay, to do the bud stitch, I'm going to do this exactly as I did the floret stitch, except I'm only going to use 3 stitches instead of 5. So first thing I'm going to do is knit 3, double looping each stitch, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to pass those 3 back to my left hand needle and drop that second loop. So now I've got 3 elongated stitches on my left needle. I'm going to knit 3 together, and then without dropping them, I'm going to bring my yarn forward and I'm going to purl 3 together. And then I'm going to take my yarn to back, and then I'm going to knit 3 together. And then you see you've got 3 stitches on your needle. I'm going to tamp this down a little, move them back over, and then knit each stitch normally. So I'm going to knit 1. That one kind of got split. Knit 2, knit 3. And now it's time for me to make another leaf. And I'm going to make this leaf exactly like I made the first leaf. So I'm going to knit 1, move it back to my left hand needle, and then I'm going to knit purl into that stitch, knit 1, purl 1, slide that back to my left needle, and then knit 2 together. And I have completed my rosebud stitch. And so just like on the floret, I will continue knitting in pattern until I reach my next assigned pooling stitch. And then I will continue working those 3 cluster sets to make my rosebuds as they appear in the assigned pooling colors. Okay, I'm now on the wrong side of my work and I'm ready to work a rosebud. And this one is going to come right up to the edge, but I'm going to go ahead and work it so I can show you exactly how to do these. It's going to be exactly the same way that we did the florets, where the wrong side is opposite the right side. So I'm going to purl 1, not double wrapping, push it back, and then I'm going to knit purl into the stitch. Purl, and I'm going to slide it back. And then I'm going to purl these 2 together since I'm on the wrong side of the work. Now I'm ready to work my rosebud, which is over the next 3 stitches. I'm going to purl 3, double looping them, 1, 2, 3, slide them back, dropping that extra loop. And now I'm going to cluster them by going purl, knit, purl. So purl, that makes 1, knit, that makes 2, purl, that makes 3, slide my needle in here, tap those down a little bit to elongate them. Now I'm going to purl 3 individually, 1, 2, 3. Now I need to make one more leaf stitch. So I'm going to purl 1, slide it back, knit purl, knit 1, pull it forward, purl 1 into that same stitch, slide those 2 back, and then purl 2 together. And now I've made the leaf stitch on the wrong side. And you can see, since I've got a couple of clusters right here together, here's my wrong side leaf and then a series of right side leaves and rosebuds. And you can see how they replicate each other. And once I knit back, all of these purl leaves will come back toward the front of the work and will look just like all of the other right side rosebuds and leaves. So I really hope you enjoy knitting Reflecting Pool, and happy knitting. Have fun.